Hello, and once again, welcome to our daily reflection. Now, this morning's reading is taken from St. Paul's letter to the Romans, and it's chapter 11, verses 13 to 24. I'm speaking now to you Gentiles. As long as I'm an apostle to the Gentiles, I will take pride in my work. Perhaps I can make the people of my own race jealous and so be able to save some of them. For when they were rejected, mankind was changed from God's enemies into his friends. What will it be then when they are accepted? It will be life for the dead. If the first piece of bread is given to God, then the whole loaf is his also. And if the roots of a tree are offered to God, the branches are his also. Some of the branches of the cultivated olive tree have been broken off, and a branch of a wild olive tree hath been joined to it. You Gentiles are like that wild olive tree, and now you share the strong spiritual life of the Jews. So then, you must not despise those who were broken off like branches. How can you be so proud? You are just a branch. You don't support the roots. The roots support you. But you will say, yes, but the branches were broken off to make room for me. That is true. They were broken off because they did not believe, while you remain in place because you do believe. But do not be proud of it. Instead, be afraid. God did not spare the Jews who are like natural branches. Do you think he will spare you? Here we see how kind and how severe God is. He's severe towards those who have fallen, but kind to you if you continue in his kindness. But if you do not, you too will be broken off. And if the Jews abandon their unbelief, they will be put back in the place where they were, for God is able to do that. You Gentiles are like the branch of a wild olive tree that is broken off, and then, contrary to nature, is joined to a cultivated olive tree. The Jews are like this cultivated tree, and it will be much easier for God to join these broken off branches back to their own tree again. Now, it's a regrettable but true fact that the history of the Christian church doesn't always make for very palatable reading. And that's especially true if you happen to be a Christian. For example, I find it very hard to understand, but impossible to ignore, the fact that for many centuries, anti-Semitism flourished across large areas of Christendom. And not only did the church do little to prevent and discourage this prejudice, it actually added fuel to the fire by doing things like declaring that Jesus had been executed by the Jewish citizens of Jerusalem, despite the insistence of all four Gospels that the crucifixion was actually carried out by Roman soldiers. Now, in this middle section of Paul's letter to the young Christian church in Rome, whilst he celebrates the fact that he sees himself as the apostle to the Gentiles, he nonetheless lays out his grief and regret that his fellow Jews have yet to accept and adopt the truth of the Christian gospel. And in today's reading, he appears to suspect that some of the Gentile members of the Roman Christian church were in danger of believing that they had in fact replaced the Jews in God's plan, and that the church was now a kind of Gentiles-only family. Many ordinary people in Rome at that time distrusted and disliked Jewish people. And how easy it would have been for the Gentile members of the little church in Rome to pick up the attitude of society around them and join in the general anti-Semitism of the day. Well, Paul was having none of it, and the illustration that he uses to make plain his hope that more of his fellow Jews will come to Christ and will be welcomed is what I'd like to reflect on today. Now, some of you may know that I'm quite a keen gardener. And many years ago, I remember my father explaining to me that almost all of the beautiful roses that graced his garden were in fact the product of two separate plants. One of those plants had a very vigorous rootstock, but only produced quite uninteresting flowers, whilst the other one produced spectacular blooms, but was more susceptible to disease due to its poor rootstock. Now, the elegant solution was to graft one onto the other and thereby produce a plant that was both strong and beautiful. And in the same way, this technique of grafting has been used by olive growers in the Mediterranean countries for thousands of years. Some olive trees grow wild, and whilst they're often quite strong in themselves, they'll not really produce good fruit. So the olive farmer might decide to take all that inner strength and harness it by grafting shoots from a proper cultivated olive into the trunk of a wild olive, thus combining the energy of the wild tree and the fruitfulness of the cultivated one. What Paul is suggesting here is that when Gentiles become Christian, the opposite of that is happening, and they are like wild branches grafted into the original cultivated olive tree. Now, he's well aware that this is the complete opposite of normal practice, but the reason he stresses it is to turn the situation around and confront the Gentile Christians with the danger of their suspected arrogance and anti-Semitism. They are the ones who have been brought to God by a miracle of grace, and they have neither right nor reason to believe that they are now superior to the Jewish non-believers. Those original cultivated branches, as he calls them, have for now been cut out of the tree, but they can always be grafted back in if, as Paul says, they do not persist in unbelief. And likewise, if the Roman Christians continue to be arrogant and boastful, they too should expect to be cut out and cast away. And so, as I reflect on this passage, I believe that the message that it holds, it's every bit as relevant for us today as it was for those who first heard it. And that is that we should never take our faith for granted, that we are saved only through God's grace, and that racism, especially anti-Semitism, should have no place in a Christian or indeed in any other society. So thank you for listening today, and may God bless all of us.